This morning, let me begin by asking this first question. Have you ever heard someone say to you, I feel like there are parts of me that have been lost along the way, and I do not know how I can go back and find them again? Whenever I hear someone utter words which have a similar meaning, these are the kinds of statements that I tend to relate to, as it is in these very moments that I would like, or I think about those parts of my own life that have been lost along the way. And those losses may have been recent, or those losses may have been a long time ago. But nonetheless, those losses have not been forgotten. But somehow I suspect that each one of us may be able to relate to similar experiences, as we all probably can name parts of ourselves that have been lost along the way. Some of these lost parts are recent wounds, and others might be scarred memories. And so the second question for us this morning, therefore, becomes, can we find the lost parts of ourselves? And can we become whole again? Friends, as we think on this morning's gospel reading, I wonder if that might have been what the shepherd and the woman were asking themselves, or alternatively, whether they might have been feeling like if they had lost a part of their life, either through the means of losing a sheep or a coin. For it was not just a sheep or any sheep, but it was this sheep, as is mentioned in this gospel reading. And in the same way, it was not just a coin or any coin. It was this coin, this particular coin that was lost. So both the shepherd and the woman lost something. And then in the case of our own lives, my friends, perhaps it is not just a part of our life, but it is a particular part of our life that has been lost along the way. For without this part, we find our lives to be less than whole. And it is these very parts of our lives that are no longer there that we so much yearn to have as part of us again. Friends, if we know what it is like to have lost a part of ourselves, then we might appreciate more what it might be like to be the shepherd and the woman in today's gospel. But you and I know that this is not the usual way that we are told to interpret this gospel. For we are accustomed to hearing that the lost sheep and the lost coin are the sinners, the persons who have gone astray and done wrong and stopped coming to church. And so in our eyes, they are lost, as the shepherd and the woman are often interpreted as images of God searching for the other person who we perceive to be lost. But suppose we have misinterpreted this story, not recognizing that God could also be searching for us. For the woman says, I have found the coin that I had lost. And the shepherd says, I have found my sheep that was lost. Friends, let us not overlook the fact that the woman lost her coin and the shepherd lost his sheep. In other words, it is really more about the shepherd and the woman than about the sheep and the coin. In fact, it may be even difficult to connect when we recognize our own faults and our own free will, or even the choice of whether to find the sheep or the coin. And another thing we must consider is that the lost sheep and the lost coin had already belonged to the shepherd and the woman. It was theirs. It was their possession. So if we want to use numbers to logically explain this, then we might say that the shepherd had 100 sheep, while the woman had 10 coins when they started out. Which then suggests that if the shepherd lost a part of himself and the woman lost a part of herself, then it would mean that at some point there was a whole, which was once complete. And there no longer is that whole, that 100%, because of what was lost in their lives. Friends, is this not an extended way of perhaps interpreting this morning's gospel readings, as we oftentimes look past ourselves and look to others as the reasons for whatever is going on in our situations? What then, my friends, if we were to look at ourselves as the shepherd and the woman in the story, from the perspective that it is a part of our own lives that represents the lost sheep and the coin that is no longer there? What if today's gospel is not really about this labeling of us or others as sinners or as virtuous, just as the Pharisees and the scribes wanted it to be? What if the gospel is really about how our lives start off with some degree of wholeness, but then over time we lose parts of ourselves, as opposed to us trying to label some persons, some other persons, as good or bad, or that they are no longer within the flock, or they are no longer within the set of coins? If we think on the very fact that Luke mentions that Jesus told them this parable, we might recognize that the pronoun them sets the stage for us to ask the question, just who was Jesus telling the parable to? Was Jesus telling the parables to the tax collectors and sinners who were coming near to listen to him? Or was he telling the parables to the Pharisees and scribes who were grumbling about him welcoming sinners and eating with them? Well, my response would be that the parable was for all of them, just as it is for all of us here today. The only difference here is that there is one group that was lost, while the other group was not. Just as there is one group that is sinful as compared to the other group, which could be considered righteous, or at least would like to think of themselves as being righteous. But it does not stop there. For we might even take this a step further to suggest that both groups actually were lost. The main difference being that one of the groups knew that they were lost, and the other group did not know that they were lost. You see, this idea of being lost is something that we all may have experienced in our lifetimes. And sometimes we know that we are lost, and sometimes we don't even have a clue that we are lost. For when we have lost a part of ourselves, we might find ourselves searching, which leads us to asking even more questions, like what parts of our lives are we searching for today? Or what do we need to find more wholeness in today? Or have we ever thought about the changes that we need to put into place to get our lives back on track? Or have we ever felt like something was missing in our lives? Friends, maybe we might already know for ourselves what it is that is actually needed to achieve these things, or maybe we are still discerning what it is that's lost. Regardless of where we are in the process, always know that it is in these moments of restless longing that we can call upon a God who is not just our creator, but he is also our Redeemer. He is also our sustainer. My friends, it is through the highways and byways of life that we often lose parts of ourselves. And I stand here to say to you that yes, it is okay to grieve those moments of sorrow, especially when our lives become overwhelming and confusing. And yes, sometimes we lose ourselves to fear, anger, and jealousy. And yes, we may want to be right for the sake of being right, more so than doing the right thing. And yes, sometimes we lose ourselves to success because we get caught up trying to gain approval or to meet someone else's expectations. And yes, sometimes we lose parts of ourselves because we have a hope or a dream of what we want to happen, even when the truth is staring us right in the face. And the examples can go on and on. Because as it is so easy to lose pieces of ourselves. And when we lose those pieces, they can disperse and go in so many directions, so many pathways over time. Perhaps we should ask ourselves, my friends, whether we are settling for less than what we truly need in our lives and in our relationships. Friends, are we living less than a whole or complete person? You understand what I just said? Are we living less than a whole or complete person? For it was the poet, Mary Oliver, who asked the question, are you breathing just a little and calling it life? That's what she said. Are you breathing just a little and calling it life? Let us not do that to ourselves, because all that would amount to is settling for less than the whole. Surely today's gospel is an invitation for all of us to seek out wholeness in this life. Or if we want to put it in biblical terms, it would mean that we want to have, or at least be eligible to receive some sense of salvation. For it is not about being 90% or even 99% of ourselves, when we know that God created us as a whole person. Let there therefore be no doubt that every sheep matters and every coin matters. For our lives are to be lived in wholeness, not only from a quantifiable standpoint, but more so from the perspective of maintaining a sound quality of life. Know that the gospel, my friends, is an opportunity for us to receive the good news from Jesus. And I want to say to you here that Jesus is not speaking about making bad people good, but it is actually about bringing persons back to some degree of wholeness, back to life. The gospel message is about creating a pathway by which we can find ourselves. It is about hearing and receiving the call back to our wholeness as individuals. We ought to recognize that Jesus is always calling us back to ourselves, back to a life of wholeness that should not be compromised for anything. So when this life's journey takes us off track, know that God is a redeemer and he is a sustainer who will journey with us and will create those pathways to bring us back to some degree of wholeness. But we must remain open to those moments when our lifelong searches can integrate and connect us back to our wholeness. So the question then becomes, where are we on this journey as individuals? Now, we all know these parables, the lost sheep and the lost coin. We know it so well. But I feel that our interpretation of these parables has been restricted or even limited. For if we do the necessary reflective work, these stories might then become parables of the found sheep, or a parable about the found coin. In other words, you look at the situation in the other direction. You don't look at the glass as half empty, but you look at it as half full. And how the story ends confirms this to me. And I think it depends on how you see the entire story. Because God, in the end, does what? God leads us back to wholeness. For it is in the ending of both of these parables that some degree of wholeness can be returned. In other words, Jesus said, the shepherd goes after the lost sheep until he finds it, and the woman searches carefully for the coin until she finds it. For those words are important in the text. The words, until he finds it, until she finds it. For me, this comes over somewhat like a promise, a call for us to look at ourselves. For the promise is that there will be a finding. And so our God, the Redeemer and Sustainer, is promising that there will be a finding of us. And the call, therefore, is that there will be a searching until what? We are found. You have to believe that. There will be a searching until you are found. You see, sometimes the call for a search is in the very places that are most known to us and familiar. And other times the call to wholeness takes us into spaces of wilderness, which is unfamiliar and unknown. And it is in these moments of searching that we may come to realize that we are not searching outside of ourselves, but we are actually searching within, which will mean that we will have to search ourselves beyond what we have done and left undone, beyond what we have or do not have, beyond our successes and our failures, beyond what is or what things might look like. Now, I do not know how or when that finding will happen for each of us, but I know that it does, if we remain open to the possibilities of it happening. So it's up to us for it to happen. For I have experienced it in my own life, and I have seen it happen in the lives of others. But there must be an openness to the possibilities of it happening. Just know that the finding, therefore, has the potential of returning us all to the place of wholeness. And also know that the searching and finding is not a one-off thing, but it is something that continuously happens over time. In other words, it's not you do it now and I got it in the bag, I'm whole again. It is continuous work on yourself and allowing God to be and to search with you as you discover more opportunities, more possibilities of where He is taking you into the future. May we therefore, my friends, receive that continuing calling in our lives to become more fully and authentically ourselves, just as the Creator God fashioned us to be. And may we never close our hearts to the opportunities of being returned to wholeness. And may we answer the call to wholeness as our God seeks to find us wherever the searching leads us to. And may we allow God, in the end, to find us in order for our wholeness to be returned to us. Amen.